You're listening to the Hella Well with Danielle show, a podcast taking women of color on a journey exploring all things wellness and travel related. We're all about showing you how to put on your oxygen mask first and creating lasting self-care habits that will free you to travel the world and live the life you truly desire, and not one you have to fake loving. I'm your host, Danielle Washington. Now let's buckle up and start this journey. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hella Well with Danielle podcast. I am your host, Danielle Washington, and today is interesting. So I have just moved into my new apartment in San Francisco. So if you hear noises like cars and people, welcome to apartment life and living in an urban setting. But as I sit here, it is November, and it's crazy that it is November this year. It's 2020 has passed us by so quickly. And people are just literally desperately craving, to human connection. People are feeling tired of being isolated. They're bored. I mean, there was even this post I posted in our travel group, the Women of Color Travel Therapy, on Facebook. There was someone who made this picture. I don't know if it's real or not. I gotta believe it's not real, but it was funny. They posted a picture of Lonely Planet guides, and it was like guides to isolation, to the kitchen, to the bedroom, to the outdoor patio, and we're just dying and craving to go outside. I mean, there's been so many reports and studies about people wanting to travel and just kind of tired of this. People are rethinking about how they live and work remotely. And so people are considering, since, their kids are in school remotely, they're working remotely, that they can up and move to different locations. But another trend that we're seeing often right now is what's being called the travel pod. And the travel pod is essentially a group of people, households, whether it's couples, friends and family, it's, just friends, it's, multi-generation, just a different group of people who are not normally all together, coming together to travel, also known as a vacation pod. And typically in a way to minimize being in contact with other travelers and also minimize the typical risks that are associated with group travel. And this is not to be confused with a travel bubble. So I just want to make sure I made that clear. A travel bubble is when there is emerged as a pandemic. Well, let me backtrack. Basically, a travel bubble is a geographical area that has low infection rates that allow residents to travel between them without having to quarantine. So that's a travel bubble. A travel pod is a group of people coming together to say, hey, let's decide on how we're going to travel and let's go somewhere together and minimize the risk. So it's just us in this little pod. So it's our little, it feels like a bubble, but it's a pod because travel bubble was already taken, because it is more like a bubble, just a hindsight and terminology. And so, what was interesting was there was a recent poll that showed, 79% of the respondents indicated that they would definitely travel in a travel pod. And I'm actually about to travel I'm just thinking about it. I already did travel in a travel pod, and then I also am about to travel in another travel pod. And it's been great. Many people who are traveling in travel pods are looking at places, or they're renting an Airbnb or a house, or they're renting a cabin. Some are considering, buying out a small hotel, which is a great idea if you have a large enough group, but we'll talk about that as well. Boat, RVs. And so there's many different ways that people are going about doing it. But before we kind of get into it, because I want to talk about, who shouldn't be in your travel pod. I want to talk about best practices, and I want to talk about, selecting destinations and having a plan B. So who should not be in your travel pod? And this is just my opinion, which is why this Hello with Danielle podcast. But my opinion is you don't want anyone in your travel pod who doesn't agree with or doesn't have similar pandemic safety rules. So, I had a random ex-boyfriend come back in my life, sort of. And, I just feel like he's someone who I know, because he's already had COVID, he was like, whatever. And that was his point. It was like, I already had COVID, so whatever. I don't feel like people are wearing, he's not someone who would wear a mask often. And, that's not someone who I would personally want in my travel pod. So in terms of my travel safety, I would want someone who I know is, paying attention to travel precautions and who feels has the same values as me. If your values is forget the mask, we don't need to social distance, you want to make sure you're with someone who has those same values, because you don't want someone like me who's going to be like, you're not wearing your mask, you didn't wash your hands, I just saw you lick a pole. If anyone's looking at a pole, you don't need to be traveling with them either. But that's just a whole, unless they're drunk. That's just probably an accident. But the other thing you want to also consider when you are picking your travel pod crew is to consider their travel style. Like, are they people who are, especially when it comes to finances, like, are they people who are going to penny pinch everything? Like, oh, I did this, so you need to do that. Like, are they checking and counting everything that you do? Are they people who don't want to do anything outdoors? Are they passive aggressive? And so you want to make sure not only are they someone who has similar pandemic values and safety values and precautions, but you also want to make sure that this is a crew that has similar travel style as you, because ain't nothing worse than traveling with someone who your styles are completely different, because forget COVID, that could ruin a friendship right there. And also consider parenting values. If your parents and you have kids on these trips as well, consider like how are they, are there different values in terms of, bedtimes, and in terms of homeschooling, in terms of safety precautions. And if you guys don't agree on that, that may be an issue. And, all of this, obviously communication styles also play into that as well. So those are people who you want to think, those are the questions you want to think about when you're picking your crew. But when you're picking your crew, I mean, we talked about, making sure you have similar safety values when it comes to the pandemic, but other things that you are going to want to truly think about considering is some of these best practices. I'm not saying you have to do all of these, but these are some things to consider. I mean, the first thing I would say, if you definitely are considering building a travel pod, is number one, once you figured out who is a part of your crew, you need to get everyone on board and on the same page in agreement in advance. So I recommend considering creating a clear, defined plan, and I would consider getting on a Zoom call so you can see everyone's facial expressions. What people put in writing, but what people say with their face and their hands and their body says a whole other thing. So I would personally consider doing this via Zoom, but get on a Zoom call with everyone and decide on the rules of engagement. Consider, how you're going to determine expenses, and other activities like cooking and cleaning and sharing spaces. I mean, I'm about to say this. Am I about to say this? Yeah, I'm about to say this. I hella love watching The Real Housewives of Atlanta. And the one thing I love watching, because every year they kind of do it, is when they go on these trips. And it is a huge issue in terms of who's in what room. Because none of them are cleaning, so they don't worry about cleaning or cooking or whatever like that. But for them and for like many other people, I mean, look at all these other reality shows like America's Next Top Model and all these other places. I'm totally dating myself, but whatever. It all mattered about the space. Like my room, why is my room smaller? Why am I next to the bathroom? Da 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 da. So when you are picking a space, especially if you are sharing a house, you're going to want to talk about, what is, the cooking and cleaning and how a space is going to be defined. But you also want to consider what are your rules of engagement? What are your set rules, especially when it comes to the precautions of the pandemic, because that's the main reason why most people are picking and deciding to do these pods in the first place. And then, one thing you may want to consider is, when setting those rules is, does everyone need to get a COVID test? Another thing to consider is, does everyone need to quarantine 2 weeks before? Being able to know and everyone agreeing on taking a COVID test, quarantine themselves for 14 days if you're not taking the test, or you could do both. But quarantining yourself for 14 days prior to just reinsures everyone's mindset that everyone in this pod is now safe to travel with each other. And you want to make sure you're with people who are going to, really say what they say and do what they say before and after. You want to make sure that you're not in a travel pod with people who say, oh yeah, I'm doing it, and then really aren't, or their kids aren't, and then especially something happens when they come back, and they're not ones who are going to tell you that, oh, whoops, I got COVID, because they're embarrassed or they don't want to alarm people. They don't want to hear, I told you, da 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 da, woo woo woo. So you're going to want people who are not only honest and trustworthy before, but after, and they will tell you whether or not they got something, and that they'll follow the strict, health protocols that you guys put together, like wearing a mask. That that's something you choose to do. Washing your hands frequently, which I hope you're choosing to doing, and just observing social distancing measures and minimizing social contacts outside of the pod. Because when you are in a pod, obviously you're still going to run into other people, especially if you're renting a house. You may get groceries or go on activities. If you're, renting a beach house, you may run into people on the beach or a vendor or whatever. And so, making sure that you have people in your pod who are also going to abide by, social distancing when they're outside of the pod. And those are things I would say are best practices when considering a travel pod. Um, what else was I going to say? Just had a moment of brain freeze. Other things to consider is the fact of, like, where are you going to go? There are so many different places. Like we talked about Airbnbs, and that's what I've done. And so even actually what I'm about to do right now is I am taking my nephew and his mother on a trip to LA for his 18th birthday. And, they live in Sacramento. I'm in San Francisco. I know that they've been being safe. I know that they're staying inside. I know that they are COVID free. So I feel comfortable in that. So I feel like I've picked the right pod members. And now it's like, okay, where are we going to go? And thinking about where you go, you want to make sure that you're looking at places and seeing what their COVID rates are. There's great trackers that you can look at. Like I think John Hopkins has a resource center that you can look at and just check that, which is a reliable tracker to see what's going on. But you also want to consider, okay, do you want a place that is really remote? And that's why I think a lot of cabins and these remote, like places like yurts and domes are really, trending on Airbnb. Actually, if you are looking at Airbnb recently posted a couple trends that they're seeing. And one of the top trends they're seeing is one of the top searches now is for entire homes, which is great. Being able to rent an entire home versus renting a room or having someone still being there is a whole different ballgame. And also Airbnb recently created this 5-step cleaning process, which they're now, I think, sometime in November. I think it's November 3rd, I could be wrong, but it's in November. They had it where you can actually search for places that have this cleaning thing, and now they're actually requiring people to, follow this cleaning process, which is great. So they're doing their part to make sure that people who are renting these homes or places, whether it's a cabin, yurt, or a house or whatever, are being safe. I'm not sure if VBROs are doing that or other places. Hotels also are upping their safety, and so that's something to consider. And then RVs as well. So when you're picking a location in a destination, I would say recommend checking to see what are the safety precautions. But know that a lot of companies and hotels and people are making the shift to ensure that people feel safe, and they're changing their cleaning policies. So, it just helps out. And the other thing, ask up a contact list, check in around arrival. And it just helps to, lessen the encounters you have with people who are outside of your pod. Again, if that's something that's of an issue, so many Airbnbs have it where you just have a lockbox or there's a code, or a lot of hotels are doing contactless as well. And if you are, being in contact with the Airbnb host or a house or villa rental, a lot of the companies are requiring the host and the guest to wear masks in these meeting encounters. And so just, making sure that these things are in place, and if they're not in place, asking for them in advance or considering them when you are looking for places. Another thing to also consider when thinking about a destination is look at places that may have kitchens. You can, obviously go out to eat, but it does, increase your risk of encountering people outside of your travel pod. So if you're trying to really stay only within the pod, having a kitchen and cooking is a great way to kind of minimize those risks. And you can shop if you're driving to your location, shop in your local area. You know those groceries, you know the area, you feel comfortable, you know what your community is doing. So getting the food in advance may be helpful. I know a lot of times people right now, especially, are looking for places that are in driving distance. That's one of the trends we're seeing in terms of travel, but people are wanting to travel, but they're traveling to places that are in driving distance versus flying to different locations. I've been flying, but a lot of people we're seeing are driving more. So if you're driving, you have the capacity and hopefully the room in your car to be able to get your groceries in advance, and that's another way to minimize and then also cook your food. Or if you're not cooking, considering getting takeout from a location, which again is another way to minimize it. Another thing to consider when looking at your destination or selecting destination is, find a place that has plenty of outdoor activities. It's great that you're in travel pod and you have your family or your friends or whoever you're connecting with, but you may just still want to be outdoors and kind of have some fun because you may be just tired, like me, of being indoors. And so having a place that has a lot of outdoor activities is great. And also look for smaller tours that you can get on with your travel pod. Like if you have a small, depending on your size of your travel pod, you may be having a travel pod that has like, I don't know, like 8 people. That's a great size to say, hey, let's find a tour that, maximizes at 8 people so we can sell out that tour if you're going somewhere where you want to do something and you feel comfortable doing a tour or doing some activity, but that you can sell it out so you know that the only people on this activity or part of this experience are everyone who's in this group. And, I love, love, love Airbnb experiences. If you haven't done it, even if you aren't going somewhere, that's another thing to do with family and friends, especially around the holidays. Like people are looking to do different things if they're not connecting and being able to travel to with the family or be with family and friends during the holidays. If they're not feeling comfortable do these travel pods or just getting together in general, doing an Airbnb experience together is a great way to connect with your family and friends, and from the comfort and safety of your home. But there are also there's online ones, but there's also ones that are in person. So when you are traveling to destinations, look at Airbnb experiences to consider, hey, is there experience that's for a small group that we can sell out, or ask them to only allow just us, and pay maybe a little bit extra. So then that only people who are in this activity are the people who are part of your travel pod. And I think that's kind of a big thing to consider. The other thing I would consider if you are renting a house, and I didn't say this before, I mean, we did talk about, look in a house or, again, hotel, look at what their cleaning and safety policies are, but also read the reviews. Or I guess it goes for hotels too. Read the recent reviews from any accommodation that you're looking at renting or staying at, and to look and see, are people talking about, is it clean? I remember looking at some places when I was looking to go to Los Angeles for next week, and people were saying, no, the place wasn't clean at all. Like, I didn't feel comfortable. I wouldn't recommend staying here. So look at stuff like that. Look at the communication. Look to say, oh, it's contactless. Oh, look to see, just are they following certain guidelines that are in line with your pandemic safety, values. And so the reviews are a great way to kind of see what they're doing now. I mean, you can look at older reviews so you can get an idea of the place in general, but looking at recent reviews really shows you, are people feeling comfortable and safe in these places? Do you want a place that maybe has a few reviews, but they're all really positive, that maybe it's a place that not a lot of people are thinking about renting, but they are safe? So it also shows you that maybe the number of guests is smaller than a place that has several reviews. So it's kind of a game that you want to toss up. And so I kind of always look for places that have a decent amount of reviews, but not 20 million to where I feel like that, they're just a revolving, new version of a hotel. And so that's something you want to consider if you are looking at renting a house or an Airbnb. Other things you want to consider is having a plan B. What if someone in your travel pod decides that, hey, I don't want to follow the rules? What are you going to do? Or what if someone decides prior to, you guys make the plan that, oh, we're all going to quarantine, and someone decides that they're not going to, and you find out, do you guys cancel the trip? Does that couple or that person get kicked out of the pod? Are they deemed the weakest link and they're out? What happens if when you guys are there and something occurs and someone's not following the standards that you guys have put together? What do? Make sure you make a plan and you guys talk about that in your pre-trip meeting, because things do happen. And that's something to consider also. I didn't really talk about it, but if you have people who are in your travel pod who are quote unquote agreeing to these new standards of rules, but this isn't how they're normally living, but this is new to them and they're just doing it because they want to go on this trip, there's a high chance that they may not intentionally, but maybe unintentionally not follow the rules. So what do when someone has the right heart, or maybe they don't have the right heart, and you're ready on this trip and they're not following the guidelines that you guys have put in place? Basically what I'm saying is you're going to want a plan B. Like pregnancy, plan B can save the day, because you don't have to then oh, what do we do? And you're thinking oh, we didn't, I don't want to bring this up, I don't want to cause friction. You already have a plan B if something like this goes in place. So if something occurs, boop, you just place the plan B in place and you're going and you're good. Also thing is to consider is, what if the place that your destination you have considered or you're planning on going has an increase in COVID cases? So have a plan B on that and make sure that you're watching and tracking the COVID cases, and you decide, what if something happens and there's 150% increase in COVID cases. 9 out of 10, you're most likely not going to want to go to this location. So that's also another thing is look about the cancellation policies. Are there policies in place regarding COVID? Think about traveler's insurance, and all these different things. So having a plan B in general is always great, but having a plan B, especially when you're planning on doing a travel pod, is so, so important, because, this trip essentially is built on trust. And trust that everyone's going to follow this set of guidelines that you guys have outlined. It's a trust of, we're trusting the location we're going. We're trusting the place where we're planning on laying our heads. And so it's really built on trust and communication. And so kind of final thoughts is things to consider is first thing you need to really truly consider before even talking about a travel pod is, do I feel safe traveling? And if you haven't heard the previous podcast, we talked about in our first podcast with Dr. Yvette McQueen, traveling during pandemic and things to consider. I highly, highly, highly encourage you to listen to that podcast episode if you haven't already, and, make the decision to see if this is right for me or not. When traveling anywhere outside of your own bubble that we've created, when you're staying in your own bubble, you have control over your environment. But when you decide to travel in a travel pod to a new destination outside of your home area or outside your home in general, you have less control over your environment and you have more likely interactions with more people. So it's something to truly consider is, do I feel safe and comfortable traveling right now? Because if the answer is no, then the whole travel pod is moot. Because you're not going to feel, if you're feeling uncomfortable and anxious the entire time, that's not a vacation. There's nothing fun about being in another destination anxious and just nervous, and it just doesn't make any sense to go. So if you don't feel comfortable traveling, I don't recommend considering a travel pod, no matter how safe the group has said it is. If you don't feel comfortable, there's no point of traveling. The other thing to talk about, again, it goes to what I said before, do I trust everyone in the travel pod? And if you don't, and be honest with yourself, because this is your life, and this is the life of your family, friends, and other people who you love. If you don't feel safe traveling with a certain group of people or a certain person, voice those moments. And, and if your voice isn't heard or it's not, but you've been overruled, then you need to decide, if I don't feel like I can trust these certain people who are considered for this travel pod, is this the right travel pod for me? My gut would probably no, but you need to ask yourself these questions, and also consider the size of the pod. The larger the pod, the higher the risk. Obviously it's great when you, like, especially around the holidays, like my holidays, like my Christmases and Thanksgiving, typically growing up were like 50, 60 people. So, and I love that. And that's what I call my immediate family. So having what would be my immediate family with me in a quote unquote travel pod, that's hella people. Like, that's a hella big travel pod. Now, I love my family, and if anyone's listening, know that I do love you. But I don't trust every single one in my family to have the same values in terms of the pandemic. Do I think that most people are safe? Yes, but I think some people are probably a little bit more relaxed in how I would show up in terms of safety precautions. And that's just normal. When you have a group of about 50, 60 people, the risk of someone not wanting to follow the rules that you guys are putting in place is just higher, or someone having COVID, just higher. So it's something to consider, is how big of a size of pod do you truly want to have during this time frame? And so those are things I would think of and consider. I mean, again, the holidays are here. So this is a creative, great way to get together with family and friends and connect and, and just get out there. I mean, I know the COVID pandemic just doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. And we're tired. I'm tired of being stuck in a place where I miss travel. I miss connecting with different people, and I miss connecting with my friends and family. And, I love being around those people during the holidays. And so I am definitely considering a travel pod during the holidays. And again, I've already done one and it worked out well for me. And I'm considering another one. I am doing another travel pod next week. I'm not ready to do a full-on group travel for Rogue Experiences right now, because that's a different ballgame. Like, I want to be able to know when I'm curating a travel experiences for Rogue Experiences, where we curate travel experiences for women of color who are busy, overworked, and looking for a break and pause that mixes like sisterhood, self-care, and just a lot of fun, that, I have the right set of people who have the same values. And so those are things I'm considering as I do prepare for trips that we're planning, hint, hint, in 2021, around the July and October timeframe, hint, hint. But I want to make sure I put in the right precautions, so people who, when they are ready to go, feel safe, and that we have done everything possible to think about their safety and the destination, and also making sure it's fun, because no one, again, wants to feel like they're traveling in the spot where it's just, you're just moving from one isolation spot to another and you can't get out and experience life and other people. And so for right now, I'm keeping my travel pod really intimate and small. I'm not looking for groups that are larger than like 2 other people, in all honesty, at this point. And so, but again, you have to do what's right for you. I hope this was helpful to you. If you are doing travel pods, I'd love to hear your experiences. What are what were good things? What are other best practices that I didn't mention? So make sure that you tag us in your Facebook post or your Twitter post about, creating travel pods. We want to hear, jump into my DM and tell me your stories as well. I'd love to share those on future podcasts. I'll be doing another podcast coming up soon, because it is the holidays and people are looking for creative ways to spend the holidays, but also, feel different than I'm just still in the house. And so I'm going to do another podcast coming up soon on staycations that aren't basic, that will also rival your typical travel experiences. So stay tuned for that podcast coming up soon. But other than that, I look forward to seeing you guys and talking to you guys next week. Take care and stay hella well. Ciao. Thanks for joining us this week on the Hella Well with Danielle show. Make sure to visit our website, hellawellwithdanielle.com, where you can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music and never miss an episode. Also, you can follow us on social media at Hella Well with Danielle on Facebook and Instagram, and Hella Well Danny on Twitter. And if you hella love the show and got some good nuggets out of it, know that I'm not too proud to ask for you to please leave a rating or review on iTunes so that we can continue to expand our reach and help other women of color. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Ciao.